Good afternoon. My name is Bradley Angell, and I'm a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Architecture at Texas A&M University. This afternoon, I'm going to present my paper, Minor Architecture as Planning Design, the Urban Architectural Forms of Communities Facing Disenfranchisement. With this research, I address critical theory according to a series of resistive expressions of the built environment. Applying a Deleuzian model for analyzing minor literature, each case reflects an attempt by an exiled community to counteract total marginalization by employing an urban linguistic expression. As such, a unique form of political enfranchisement is realized based on real property recognition for specialty residence, a collective home for non-dominant existence and continued political enunciation. In 1975, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari published a literary treatise on the work of Franz Kafka. In order to illuminate their critical method of Kafka interpretation, they created a working model for minor literature based on a characterization evaluation. The three characteristics of minor literature are the deterritorialization of language, the connection of the individual to political immediacy, and the collective assemblage of enunciation. After roughly 100 pages, the writers find that Kafka was in fact successful as an advocate of resistance through his novels. The writers further entice others to follow Kafka's lead by stating, "That is the glory of this sort of minor literature, to be a revolutionary force for all literature. Steal the baby from the crib, walk the tightrope." Early in the treatise, Deleuze and Guattari promote a tetralinguistic model of the literary expression that can be used to interpret both dominant and resistant power. The four categories include vernacular, which is maternal, territorial, and is rule at its origins; vehicular, which is urban, governmental, worldwide, of business and exchange; referential, which is the expression of sense and of culture; and mythic, which is on the horizon of culture, caught up in spiritual and religious enterprise. In 1993, architectural theorist Robert Small undertook the task of characterizing the work of another impossible creator with his article, One or Several Masters. In it, Small references the Kafka treatise to suggest the minor model could be applied to architecture, specifically the highly divergent work of his subject, John Hadouk. Small's impulse to apply the Deleuzian model came from a 1957 article co-written by Hadouk and Colin Roll titled Lockhart, Texas. Lockhart, shown here, is a community changed little in its urban plans since the late 1950s. In the article, Lockhart is idolized as one of the many Texas courthouse towns that have achieved minor triumphs of urbanity. In spite of such inspiration, Small finds that Hadouk failed in his half-hearted ambition to perform as a minor architect, stating, "At every turn, the chance for a minor practice appears to have been defeated. Through fetishization of materiality, the triumphant celebration of renewed phenomenological subject, the construction of a heroic category of the genius master rather than the weakening of the status of the author through the vita minor." Revisiting Small's suggestion, I have addressed minor urban design from the standpoint of the built product rather than any single master. Further, as Deleuze and Guattari examined the novel as the individual products of Kafka's greater literary enterprise, I have evaluated independent urban architectural forms as the analogical built counterpart to the novel in literature. To proceed, I have applied two tests to four urban architectural forms. The first test is historic analysis based on the characteristics outlined previously. First, does the case exhibit a high coefficient of deterritorialization? Is everything in the expression political by direct exercise? And finally, is everything in the expression a collective enunciation of the inhabitants? I have also performed a qualitative test per case based on the academic work of Ian McCart's Design with Nature. Shown here in the table above, I have employed a method of physical categorization and measure used regularly with comprehensive environmental protocols in the United States, most notably the California Environmental Quality Act. I've selected one case of potential minor realization from each of the four categories outlined in the Kafka treatise. These include the Isla, Vista Park District of Southern California, the Tibetan Government-in-Exile of Northern India, the Emergent Cannabis Community of Northern California, and the Student Bonfire of South Texas. Accordingly, these communities represent a case from each of the tetralinguistic model, vernacular, vehicular, referential, and mythic. I found that each community expressed a clear desire that is incompatible with the dominant culture under contemporary globalization. In spite of such incompatibility, each community has been afforded some other, lesser form of collective expression in the built environment by a patron member of the dominant culture, usually after a spell of tragedy or violence. Further, each Further, as each community has evoked a desire for self-sufficiency in their pursuit of minority accommodation, each has achieved some measure of independence with collective specialization. This reality contrasts from my initial expectations, as at the start I imagined each community to have the typical urban devices planners expect, including zoning, police, sewer, parks, etc., all within and managed at an off-grid location. Rather than off-grid, each case exhibits an interdependent yet autonomous identity within a greater dominant network. My first case is the Isla Vista Rec and Park District. The unincorporated beach community of Isla Vista is landlocked by the University of California, Santa Barbara in the Pacific Ocean. Within the roughly half-mile square, 345-acre community, there reside an estimated 22,000 occupants, 82% of which are between 18 and 24 years of age, and with over 95% are renters. Isla Vista itself grew out of the need for intense student housing, and the Isla Vista Recreation and Park District was born of anti-Vietnam youth uprisings that occurred in 1970. The local Bank of America building was burned 3 times, and at the second bank burning on April 18, 1970, a student was shot and killed while fighting back the fire mob on behalf of the bank. Peaceful protests began as Isla Vista devolved into an armed camp controlled by state and regional police. After unified protests, the police were replaced with community building efforts, one of which was the Recreation District. Since its elected authorization on Halloween of 1972, the district continues as the only local government agency directly representing the residents of Isla Vista. Aggressively developing the remaining open space within the district's boundaries as parks, biology reserves, and community service resources, the district's managers have endeavored to redefine the overcrowded hamlet with a vernacular linguistic expression, actively resisting the over-vehicularization left from the 1960s. In these pictures, you can see the open, undeveloped nature of many of the parks. The district's historic red barn represents the pre-development status of the community as a small ranch. Management practices reference indigenous Native American sources, including the Chumash, who were a Polynesian-based tribe living in Santa Barbara at the time of the Spanish mission. Also, an oak orchard has been preserved to shade activities located behind the barn. The Park District owns just over 50 acres of property, 99% of which is used to manage and provide collective services for Isla Vistans. Under the category of land use planning, 20 acres of the massive swaths of property have been held in reservation as open space so as to counteract the overbuilt nature of the community. Also, 16 acres of space is devoted to recreation programs that were lacking in the past. Another 12 acres has been used as endangered species habitat, also providing open space in the district. My second case is the Tibetan Government-in-Exile. In 1959, approximately 80,000 Tibetans followed the Dalai Lama in Nepal, Bhutan, and India seeking refuge while citing political and religious persecution by the People's Republic of China. Experiencing the majority of incoming refugees, the government of India started a progressive program of Tibetan rehabilitation to supplement the Dalai Lama's own efforts of exiled self-help. By April of 1960, the Tibetan Government-in-Exile was established on the grounds of a former garrison neighborhood that was ruined by landslides in the early 1900s. Today, the village housing the Tibetan Government-in-Exile is a cluster of sturdy, clean buildings a few miles north, uphill of the Dharamsala city center. The administration's district bounds within the Gingshang village has an area of 9.7 acres and an approximate population of 825 Tibetans. Since the PRC took a dominant position over what is now the Tibetan Autonomous Region, the former religious rulers of the Tibetan Plateau have attempted a re-territorialization of their own refugee encampments in Dharamsala so as to assert an independent political codification of nationalism for all Tibetans, independent of Chinese authority. Pictured here is the primary gateway into the village, the formal downtown square anchored by a chortin, and a series of administrative buildings on the square, as well as a few down the road. Clearly exemplifying the counter-vehicular nature of the TGIE's urban development, the village is established to provide administrative services, committing more than one-third of the total village to public services. Housing resources are largely dormitory style for administrative personnel. Due to the hilly, unstable nature of the village, efforts have been made to strengthen the site with retaining walls. And my third case is the emergent cannabis community of Arcata. Arcata is a small college town of Humboldt County, serving as a cultural and intellectual focus for this environmentally sensitive Lost Coast of Northern California. Arcata has a population of 17,000 residents, spread over an area of over 5,400 acres. Since the late 1960s, the city has endeavored as a civic model of environmental stewardship with its own pristine community forest, a wetland-based sewage treatment system, an abolition of all genetically modified foods, and a pioneering permitting system for storefronts that distribute marijuana. As medicinal marijuana was legalized in California in 1996 with Proposition 215, Arcata's business owners, law enforcement personnel, and planners came together to accommodate cannabis retail operations. By ushering in the nation's first medical marijuana identification card system, then by creating the first zoning statute for citywide application, Arcata has become a heralded model of the gray market distribution of medical cannabis. Today, the pot industry is undeniably the foundation of Arcata's economy. Located within a 65.5-acre sphere of commercial influence, there are 4 dispensaries, 2 medical marijuana. There are 4 dispensaries, 2 marijuana accessory shops, 2 large-scale hydroponic specialty stores, and a hydroponic manufacturing facility. As the referential linguistic category is concerned with a sense and of culture, here Arcata has led an ongoing cultural experiment for alternative medicine in Northern California. Shown here is downtown Arcata during their twice-weekly farmers market, the Arcata Eye Center, the Humboldt Medical Supply, the Humboldt Cooperative, a hydroponic demonstration at Water City Garden Supply, the Pacific Paradise Accessories Shop, the Humboldt Garden Supply, and the Humboldt Patient Resource Center. Of the urban development committed to marijuana distribution, all 4 categorical resource allocations have a direct application in the dispensary system. Beyond the obvious major economic commercial resource impact, the public service category reflects the important clinical aspect of the cannabis culture in California. Nearly all of the dispensaries have indoor grow houses, signifying a major resource allocation for agriculture. My final case is the student bonfire. The bonfire tradition began on the Texas A&M campus in 1909 and literally collapsed on November 18, 1999, killing 12 and injuring 27 volunteers. In 2005, a committed group of bonfire enthusiasts created a nonprofit corporation to publicly rehabilitate and continue the century-old tradition off campus. Existing without an address in a rural no-man's land endemic of Robertson County, the bonfire is now built and burned off a farm-to-market road found only by geospatial coordinates on Google Maps. The current student bonfire site has an area of 44 acres and is led by 13 student leaders, 4 senior red pots, 4 junior red pots, and 5 brown pots. Dedicated to exemplify there's a spirit can never be told, the built language of the student bonfire is an apparatus of spiritual effervescence, an event that can admit the individual to a sacred, intersubjective social world of the group. As recent as 2009, Student Bonfire had over 1,500 participants in cut and stack, formal events that entail first the harvest of local trees and thereafter the assemblage of such lumber according to county-approved engineering plans. It is estimated that over 8,000 spectators attend the burn event each year, with spectator numbers limited by available parking, not enthusiasm for the tradition. Pictured here are the bonfire stack, the brown pot shack, the red pot shack, a travel trailer used for cooking, and the iconic Aggie bonfire storage trailer shown in many of the images after 1999 tragedy. Unlike the other cases previously shown, the majority of Student Bonfire's 44-acre site is reserved on burn night to park carloads of spectators. The next largest categorical resource use is land use planning, the open space needed to manage and organize the harvested logs into their eventual sculptural structure. I would like to recall that the theme of our conference is titled Sustainable Architecture and Urban Design Intervention, Reaching Out to the Bottom Billion. This research lends itself to reevaluating the motivation of designers' interventions, and more importantly, the role of globalization in urban redevelopment schemes. Based on the results of this study, I argue that organizing communities based on re-enfranchising attributes allows for a recombinative solidarity for willing members, providing focus and necessitating measurable results that look beyond the disenfranchisement events already suffered. By merging the politics of a resistant group with a specific specialized constructive expression of urban architectural design, both patron and minority community can avoid collective and perhaps unintended marginalization, examine the mechanisms of the dominant culture in a critical method of alternative development, finally, pursue different enfranchising techniques without investing the whole project of modernization in a single course of untested progress. I will conclude with my favorite Corbusier quote: "The machinery of society, profoundly out of gear, oscillates between amelioration of historic importance and of catastrophe."